Wrong Turn 2021 is a reboot of a classic 90s film, I think, called a classic 90s film called Wrong Turn, which is about a group of cannibals that pick off people who are hiking. But this was a little bit different because I had heard very early on that they were dealing with a completely different subject. I mean, there was still going to be mountain men, but they were going to take it in a very different direction. And they did. They did take it in a very different direction. That's something I can give this reboot a lot of credit for. This feels insanely different from the original. It's not a complete rehash. It's not a complete reboot. This is very much its own thing. And that's actually one of my biggest positives, is that this movie is able to take it in a new direction, and actually somewhat interesting direction. But the interesting direction is actually where the movie faults, because of things they do in the third act. The first two acts of this film are actually pretty decent. They're pretty good. The human characters, they actually feel like they are human, and that they actually care about each other, and they have really good chemistry. The acting is pretty on point, and the motivations seem there, although there are some very tacky scenes where they kind of just tell you what their motivation is. But other than that, like, the characters are like, there's like a dude who's an asshole, but he's not just an asshole just for the sake of being an asshole. He actually has some character to him and some motivation to him that actually makes sense, and you understand the reasoning of his decisions for the most part, but you really get to see the traumatic events of these characters take place, and how they react is completely fair, and you feel really bad for them, and it adds a little bit of weight to the tension and to the characters themselves, making for some really, really cool scenes. Now, this movie also does something in its second act that I'm not going to spoil, because, again, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, but they convey a really, really interesting idea with these mountain men, and they do something really, really cool that I did not expect. And it also serves as a really, really interesting character arc for this one character, which I'm also not going to get into. It's this very real moment, if you know what I mean. And it actually is played off pretty well in the second act, and you see these things happen, and they make sense to you because of everything you saw previously in the film, and it actually does build off itself pretty well. Although the first two acts do have some cliches that aren't really used to its advantage to do anything different, but that's really, like, that's not something that I expected the film to do. So therefore, it's not the biggest problem for me. It's like it's kind of just there, and like there's nothing I can do about it. But then the third act comes along, and it completely de-writes every single idea this movie potentially could have executed. It's frustrating because the third act of this movie is atrocious, but the first two acts are actually pretty good. So therefore, there's already a conflict in my head, because I really enjoyed those first two acts, but this third act does everything wrong, and the ending is awful. It just becomes tacked on, and it just doesn't feel important, and it doesn't feel like it needs to be there, and the movie's way too long because of it. And then they could have just they could have done something interesting with the concepts they were conveying in the second act, but they just take it in a completely different direction that is jarring in the worst way possible, and it doesn't make any sense, because we're led to believe something in the second act that just we don't believe by the end of the movie anymore. And it's stupid, because what they were conveying was really potentially cool. I will give that this movie has some very intense scenes, very intense sequences, and is way better than a lot of the Wrong Turn movies, from what I've heard. I've only seen the 6 and this one, but I'm kind of refusing to watch all the others except for maybe the very first one, because they just all seem like trash. With that being said, this movie was surprising and then disappointing. Therefore, it mostly became disappointing. So with all that being said, I'm going to give Wrong Turn 2021 a C-. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed that review. Look out for some reviews coming soon for Supernova, and tomorrow, The Little Things, which I am super excited to see and talk about. So I will see you guys in those videos. Take care.